Let's read my followers' stories.
John always knew his father was different. While other kids in the neighborhood talked about their dads working in offices, shops, or driving trucks, John's dad was a soldier. It wasn't something he fully understood as a child, but he knew it made his father special. When his dad was home, life felt different. The air in the house seemed thicker, filled with the presence of a man who had seen and done things John could only imagine. His father was often away, sent on missions to far-off places that John couldn't even pronounce. And when he was home, it was like a holiday, even if just for a short while. John would sit by the window, waiting for his father's return, his heart racing with excitement. When he finally saw his father's figure walking up the driveway, John would run out to greet him, wrapping his arms around him as if to make up for all the time they had been apart. His father, tall and strong, would kneel down and hug John back, the scent of sand and metal still clinging to his clothes. "Dad, what was it like this time?" John would ask eagerly, his eyes wide with anticipation. His father would smile, ruffle John's hair, and say, "Patience, John. Stories are best told after dinner." This became their ritual, one that John cherished. They would sit on the porch after dinner, the sun setting in the distance, casting a golden glow over the fields, and his father would weave tales of bravery, loyalty, and the bombs forged in the heat of battle. As John grew older, he began to notice that his father didn't just tell these stories for entertainment. There were lessons hidden within them, lessons that John found himself thinking about long after the stories were told. And with each story, John's understanding of his father's life deepened. One summer evening, after a particularly long deployment, John's father returned home with a noticeable weariness in his eyes. It was as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. They sat together on the porch, the air thick with the warmth of the day and the hum of cicadas. John, now a teenager, had grown accustomed to these moments. He knew that his father needed time to unwind, to let the world he had just returned from slowly fade away. But tonight felt different. There was something in the way his father looked at him, something more solemn, more reflective. "Dad," John began hesitantly, "what's on your mind?" His father looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "John, do you remember the stories I've told you over the years?" "Of course," John replied. "I remember all of them." "Good," his father said, nodding slowly. "Because there's something I've been meaning to tell you, a story I haven't shared before. It's not an easy one, but it's important." John felt a shiver of anticipation. He had heard stories of battles, of comrades lost and found, of heroic deeds and close calls. But something told him this story would be different. "It was during one of my first deployments," his father began, his voice steady but laced with the seriousness that made John sit up straighter. "We were in a region torn apart by conflict. The locals were caught in the middle, and our mission was to provide protection and assistance to those who needed it most. There was this one village, small and isolated, surrounded by rugged mountains. We had received reports that enemy forces were planning to attack it, to use it as a strategic point. Our orders were to defend the village, to ensure that the people there were safe. When we arrived, the village was eerily quiet. The buildings were old and weathered, the streets dusty and deserted. But as we moved through the narrow alleys, we began to see signs of life. Families huddled together in their homes, children peeking out from behind their mother's skirts. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. We set up our defenses, trying to reassure the villagers that we were there to protect them. But as night fell, the tension grew. We knew the enemy was coming. It was just a matter of when." John's father paused, his gaze distant as if he were looking back into the past. John waited, not wanting to interrupt the flow of the story. "It was around midnight when it happened," his father continued, his voice lower now. "The first shots rang out, echoing through the mountains. The enemy was attacking from all sides, trying to overwhelm us. We fought back, doing everything we could to hold our ground. But the situation was dire. They had more men, more firepower, and they were relentless. In the midst of the chaos, I found myself separated from my unit. I had been helping a wounded soldier when an explosion threw us both into a nearby building. When I came to, I realized I was alone. The soldier I had been helping was unconscious, and the sounds of battle were muffled, distant. I knew I had to get back to my unit, but as I tried to find my way out, I heard something, someone crying. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise outside, but it was there. I followed the sound, and in the corner of the building, I found a little boy, no older than 5 or 6, curled up and trembling with fear. He must have been hiding there, trying to escape the chaos outside. He looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't leave him behind. I couldn't just walk away. John felt a lump form in his throat. He could picture the scene so vividly, the terror that child must have felt, and the weight of the decision his father had to make. I picked him up, his father said, his voice growing stronger as he continued. I told him everything would be all right, even though I wasn't sure if it would be. I carried him through the building, trying to find a safe way out. The enemy was closing in, and every step felt like a gamble. But I couldn't let that boy down. We made it out, eventually, and I found a safe place to leave him, with some of the villagers who were hiding nearby. I told them to take care of him, to keep him safe until the fighting was over. Then I rejoined my unit and continued the battle. John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What happened to the boy?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His father looked at him, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never saw him again. But I like to believe that he made it out of that village, that he survived and grew up to live a good life. Because that's what we fight for, John, for the chance to make a difference, even if it's just for one person." There was a long silence between them as John absorbed his father's words. He had always known that being a soldier meant making sacrifices, but hearing this story made it also much more real. "Dad," John said after a while, "how do you do it? How do you keep going, knowing that you might not always be able to save everyone?" His father smiled, a sad but understanding smile. "It's not easy," he replied. "There are times when the weight of it all feels overwhelming. But I remind myself that every life we save, every person we protect, it matters. It's not about being a hero or winning every battle. It's about doing the best we can with the time we have, about living with honor and integrity, and about never losing sight of why we fight in the first place." John nodded, feeling a newfound respect for his father. He had always admired him, but now he understood the depth of his father's courage and the burden he carried. It wasn't just about the battles or the victories, it was about the people, the lives touched and saved, the small acts of kindness that could ripple out and change the world. As the night grew darker, they continued to talk, John asking questions and his father answering with the wisdom and experience of someone who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. They talked about the importance of loyalty, of standing by your comrades no matter what, of finding strength in the face of fear. And as they spoke, John realized that his father had been preparing him for something all along. These weren't just stories, they were lessons, guidance for the path that lay ahead. His father knew that one day John would have to make his own choices, face his own challenges, and he wanted to make sure that John was ready. The years passed, and John grew from a boy into a young man. He continued to listen to his father's stories, absorbing the lessons they held, and when the time came, he made the decision that had always been in his heart. He enlisted in the military, following in his father's footsteps. It wasn't an easy choice, but it felt right. He knew the risks, the sacrifices, but he also knew the importance of the work his father had dedicated his life to. And as he stood there on the day of his graduation from basic training, wearing the uniform that symbolized so much, he felt a deep sense of pride and connection to his father. His father was there, of course, standing tall and proud, his eyes filled with emotion as he watched John receive his commission. When the ceremony was over, they stood together, father and son, both soldiers now, bonded by more than just blood. "You've made me proud, John," his father said, his voice thick with emotion. "But remember, being a soldier is about more than just wearing the uniform. It's about the choices you make, the way you live your life, and the impact you have on the people around you." John nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I'll remember, Dad. I promise." The following years tested John in ways he could never have imagined. He found himself in places that felt like the ends of the earth, in situations that pushed him to his limits. But through it all, he carried his father's lessons with him. He remembered the stories, the sacrifices, the quiet strength his father had shown him. There were moments when John was afraid, moments when the weight of his responsibilities felt too heavy to bear. But in those times, he would think of his father, of the boy in the village, of the countless lives his father had touched, and it gave him the strength to keep going. One particularly difficult mission brought John to a remote village much like the one his father had described. The people there were caught in the crossfire of a conflict they had nothing to do with, their lives upended by forces beyond their control. As John and his team worked to secure the area, he saw the fear in the villagers' eyes, the uncertainty of their future. And then he saw him, a young boy, no older than 6, standing alone in the shadow of a crumbling building. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his small frame trembling as he looked out at the soldiers. For a moment, John was transported back to the story his father had told him so many years ago, and he knew what he had to do. He approached the boy slowly, kneeling down to his level. "Hey there," John said softly, offering a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay. I'm here to help." The boy looked at him, uncertain, but something in John's eyes must have told him that he could be trusted. The boy stepped forward, hesitantly at first, then ran into John's arms, clinging to him as if he were a lifeline. John held the boy close, feeling the weight of the responsibility in his arms. He knew he couldn't change the world, but he could change this boy's world, if only for a moment. He carried the boy to safety, just as his father had done all those years ago, and made sure he was taken care of before returning to his duties. As the years went by, John continued to serve, each mission a new chapter in his life. He saw things that would haunt him, things that would inspire him, and through it all, he remained true to the values his father had instilled in him. He knew that being a soldier was about more than just following orders. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than you found it. Eventually, John became a father himself. He watched as his own son grew up, full of curiosity and wonder. And when the time was right, he began to tell his son stories, stories of bravery, of sacrifice, of the bond between father and son. He told his son about the boy in the village, about the choices his father had made, about the legacy that had been passed down through generations. And as John's son listened, wide-eyed and full of admiration, John felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the legacy of his father would continue, that the lessons learned on distant battlefields would live on in the hearts of those who came after. The soldier's legacy was not just one of battles won and lost, but of lives touched, of hearts healed, of the quiet, unbreakable bond between father and son. And as John sat with his own son on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, he knew that the legacy would endure, carried forward by love, honor, and the enduring spirit of those who had come before.
Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. If you want to share your story, write it down in the comments. Peace.